Hello creeps! Anna here, and today I wanted to talk about all the extreme horror books that I have read in 2023. We're ranking them today. So extreme horror books are a little hard to rank or even compare to one another. I mean, how do you rank a book that's so bizarre or messed up, or you know what I mean? I did the best I could. What I did was I separated them into 4 categories. And I think that this will be helpful too for people who are looking for extreme horror books to read, better than if I just told you my least favorite to my most favorite. Do you get what I'm saying? Although I still have my group of most favorite here for you. So you'll still know which ones are my favorite, but I think that this makes a little bit more sense. Obviously, the term extreme is subjective. It's also why I like using the term extreme versus specifically like splatterpunk or something, because extreme encompasses more novels. I've always read extreme books, you know, books that are more intense or gross or what have you. And then thanks to things like Book Talk this year, I got introduced to a lot of these great books. So I just prefer the all-encompassing term extreme to anything more specific. Ooh, this one goes here. So if something isn't extreme to you, it's only here because it's been on some extreme horror list of books. And then the last thing before we get into it is just know, even if it's in a lower category, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be an easy read, or that, you know, like still do all your research and check all the warnings if you don't want to read certain things. These categories, just because one is lower than the other doesn't necessarily mean that I like those books less than these. I think that makes sense, but my most favorite will still be last. Okay, let's start with our first category of the day, and this category is this extreme horror? So these are either said to be extreme by the authors or were on lists for extreme horror books, but I don't think for me that I would consider these extreme. They're extremely mild compared to some of the other stuff that I've read this year, but again, I've read some messed up books, so keep that in mind as well. And the first one here is Ash Eric Moore's Carney. This is about a group of friends that goes to a carnival and they end up getting abducted by the clowns, and there is some humans being made into hot dogs, but that's really it. Like, there really isn't any extreme stuff in here. There's a content warning on this one, and in the content warning it says it has animal violence in here, which at first I was like, oh, I'm not gonna like this, but the animal violence is an animal biting a person. I don't consider that animal violence. So this one was just a typical, like, it was fine. It was a cute little horror novella about clowns, but it is to me is not extreme. And I get, you know, the author just trying to warn people and let them know that there could be things that audiences might find sensitive, so I can appreciate that. But just for me personally, not an extreme horror novel. I mean, I've read just regular horror novels that are way more messed up than this one. So I don't know if that fits under my definition for extreme horror, but nonetheless, it is a book that I read this year. Same with this one, It's Me, Charlie. This is by C.M. Guidross. And I read this one because a lot of people were talking about how messed up it was online. And, you know, to each their own. Everybody has their own things that disturb them more than other people. But this is about a woman who's like a book content creator online. A man enjoys her content and then reads her explicit novels that she wrote herself, like erotic novels. And so because of that, he thinks that he knows what she wants in a relationship, and so he abducts her and tries to make her be his girlfriend. There definitely are some disturbing things in here, but I think it was people commenting on this book that I was like, oh, this is gonna be so messed up, and then I read it and I was like, this is extreme horror though. This one has a little bit more extreme stuff than this one does, but still not, I didn't really find it like that disturbing or messed up, but I can see how some people might. Next one here is Maeve Fly by CJ Lee. Now, the writer did not say that this was an extreme horror book, but this has been on a lot of extreme horror lists that I found, and so I kind of wanted to include this one just in case people were thinking about picking it up. It's about a woman named Maeve Fly. She lives with her grandmother, and she feels like they're kind of kindred spirits in that they both have a dark side, but they don't really fit in with people. She connects a lot with these narrators of stories that are more disconnected from society, and she ends up kind of letting her Patrick Bateman loose This one, I can see why some people would think that it was extreme. It's maybe extreme for a typical horror book, but I don't know, it's even way more mild than American Psycho is. And there are some similar scenes in there, and there's some, I can see content warning in here, but I wouldn't consider this an extreme horror book. Although I did really enjoy it for just a typical horror novel. Let's move to our second category here, and this category is called This Book Will Ruin Your Day. And I've got quite a few here, and I think we should start with Baby in a Blender. This is by Terry Musalata, and this is kind of what started it all. So I had come across a website called Godless on Book Talk, and that got me into a lot of really messed up stuff. And so I saw this book called Baby in a Blender, and I was intrigued, and I thought, I'm gonna read this one. And so I did. I purchased it, I read it, and it is still the most messed up book I think I've ever read. I mean, you can get from the title, yeah, babies do go in blenders in this book, but it's so much more than that. It's so much worse than that. The whole story is about a narrator and his family. They have an incestuous relationship, and it goes into detail about his mom and his sister and him, and it is just gross. Then there's some, you know, typical murder. A baby is abducted after he murders the mother, and then that is where the blender comes in. I think it's like 13 or 30 pages long. It's very short and still one of the messed up things I've ever read. The writer has recently released an extended version, and I have gotten a few comments, hey, you should read the extended version. And I probably will eventually, but I gotta work my nerve up to that. Out of all of the books here, Baby in the Blender is the one that I think made me want to vomit the most. Like, it was a gnarly book. The next one here is The Clown Hunt by Judith Sonnet. This is about a man who starts his, well, he kind of restarts his life over after a messy breakup, and he enters the world of sex work, and he gets abducted because he's dressed as a clown by a group of people who despise clowns and want to kill all clowns. So they just go around finding clowns, and then they just let them loose and then hunt them. The murder scenes can be definitely brutal in here. There's also some baby stuff in here as well. Like, it can be bad, but that's not even what disturbed me about this book. After that, there's some torture scenes where they're like feeding people fecal matter and just some gnarly stuff. So this one was actually pretty hard to get through for me, and I would say it ruined my day. So these books either ruined my day, my week, my month, my year, or my life. And so yeah, that one ruined my day. Next we have Cows by Matthew Stokow. This one is about a man who lives with his mother. His mother feeds him just awful, disgusting food. He goes to work at like a meat plantation, and he meets a cow who speaks to him, and then he starts following the cow around. The synopsis of the story is so wild, but the book is so much more than that. And it's one of those where if you dig under the surface, I think that it does have meaning. It is actually a pretty interesting book if you want to take the time to work through it, but it is gnarly. It's freaking messed up. I can see why this book is talked about so much, because it is really freaking gross. I still think interesting to read if you're into really, really extreme books and you kind of want to dissect things a little bit more. The next one I have here is Jack Ketchum's The Girl Next Door. Now, I don't necessarily know if Jack Ketchum books fit into extreme category the way that some of these other books do, but here's the thing. This book right here was published in 1989, and so I think just having a book like this as a mass-produced book, just a typical horror book, is pretty impressive, and same with another one that we'll mention in a little bit. They are on some extreme horror lists, but I have my own reasons for including them as well, which I think is just, it's impressive that these books were published and tons of people read them in the 80s. Like, I don't know. There's some interesting stuff in his books, but let's start with Jack Ketchum's The Girl Next Door. This book ruined my life. I'm gonna be honest with you, it ruined my life. This is a book where I still think about it all the time. It's a book I will never, ever, ever reread again. Like, I'll go back and read the new updated Baby in a Blender. I just gotta work up to it. But this book, I don't think I'll ever read again. It was that messed up. And it's so messed up because it's a good book, and I hate it because it's a good book. So it's about a young girl who goes and moves in next door to the narrator of the story. He's a young boy. It's unfortunately based on true events, and the girl just gets tortured by everyone in the neighborhood, and you're just along to see what happens to this poor girl. And what's so messed up about it is that it's not that you have sympathy necessarily for the characters, but they're children. And so you get to know them and see them as children, and then see this awful thing take place. And so even if you don't sympathize with them, you still are just like, this is so messed up. Man, this book sucks. This book sucks. Because it's so good, it sucks. You know what I mean? So it's not a book that's made just to gross you out. It pulls at your heartstrings. And I have people that have written me and said, I read this book 30 years ago and I still think about it. So yeah, not one that I'll ever revisit, I don't think, because it really just messed me up. But let's move on to our next category here. And this category is called A Bloody Good Time. So these are books that I just think are fun. They're just fun and bloody, you know? So the first one I have here is Baby Fights by Robert Essig. And to be honest, the first two, I don't know if they belong in this category or if they should be in my favorites list. So keep that in mind with these first two books. But Baby Fights is just hilarious. It's a well-written story about babies that are fed angel dust and meant to fight to the death. And it's an extreme horror book, but really not that extreme when you consider the content of the book. It could have been way worse than it was. So it's pretty tame given the content compared to these books, but I thought it was so fun. I don't know what that says about me, but I really enjoyed that book, and I will definitely pick up more of his works in the future. Maybe that's why I fit it into this category though, because this category is called A Bloody Good Time, and that's what that book was to me. It was just fun. I laughed a lot. I thought it was messed up, but in a fun way. This one too, The Slob by Aaron Beauregard. This one was another favorite that I read this year, but it just fits so well in this category, you know? It's about a woman who sells vacuums door to door. She gets abducted by this slob of a man, and he goes on to torture her and do absolutely horrendous things to her. I mean, if you have any sensitivity whatsoever, don't read this book. But I thought that there was enough in here where you could really analyze kind of the character and see where she came from and what led to her decisions, and you kind of just get to see her battle for her life. And it is a cool book, you know, but really messed up. Like, there are some parts in here where I was just, you know, it just, yeah, it gets to you. The next one in here is Duncan Ralston's Womb. This one is just, I mean, all of these are wild rides. This is about a man who rents a hotel room. He has a sex worker come and meet him there. He tells her a lot of stories surrounding that hotel and that specific hotel room. Really messed up things that have happened with drugs or violence or what have you. I'm not even gonna go into it further, okay? But this one, there's just some stuff that you read in life where you go, oh, my brain hadn't even conjured up that as a possibility for a story. And so this is one where I can honestly say I've never read a book like it before, and I don't know that I ever will. And yeah, I understand why it's on a ton of lists and why people are interested in reading it, because it is just one of those books that you just at the end go, okay, all right, we went there, we sure did. Another one is Playground by Aaron Beauregard. So I do feel like The Slob maybe fits a little bit more into my favorites. This one was just a bloody good time. It's about a group of kids that get invited to a playground that's really just a death trap. There's like knife saws on slides, and it's kind of like Saw for children is what I would say this book is about. It's another one that you read it and you just go, yeah, I would have never thought about this at all, but nonetheless a funny story. And yeah, I enjoyed that one a lot. The next one is Talia. This is by Daniel J. Filippi. I never know how to pronounce that. But this one was really interesting too. It's about a woman who gets forced into the porn industry. They end up changing things on her and force her into making snuff films. I don't know how much to give away because the story definitely takes a turn about halfway through. And it turns into more of an empowering story. Maybe I'll leave it at that. There's some hard stuff to read in here, but it also has some, like, you know, twists in there that make it more of an empowering story, but still, I mean, very messed up. Jack Ketchum's Off Season. If you are going to think of a book that is labeled A Bloody Good Time, This one is it, my friends. Really, the only stuff in here that's messed up is cannibal and torture kind of stuff. So it's really not as offensive as some of these other stories are. And I would say maybe if you wanted to dip your toes in some extreme horror, but you're not ready yet, this might be a good place to start. But also check your warnings, because I don't know for certain, and I don't want to lead you astray. But I think that this one is kind of just like a classic cannibal story. There's not really too much else to it. But I gotta tell you, okay, because I read A Girl Next Door, and that one, it's extremely well written and blah blah blah. This one was written in 1980, so I believe that this was Jack Ketchum's very first novel, which so impressive that this is someone's first novel ever, you know? But I would definitely say that I enjoyed the writing in The Girl Next Door more. I felt like it was just maybe a more polished story, you know, which makes sense. This was his first book. However, still very impressive. And when it started out, I was like, oh, this is so different than The Girl Next Door. It's just about a group of friends that go and stay in like what would now be an Airbnb. They are unfortunately kind of next to where a bunch of cannibals stay, and the cannibals descend and they're trying to fight for their lives. And so the story starts off, I wouldn't say mild, but less intense than what I was expecting. And by the end, I was like, oh, it is Cannibal City in this story. There are so many scenes of cannibals and torturing, eating people, and oh my gosh, there's so much going on in here. I mean, it's impressive that this was published in the 80s, and you know, Jack Ketchum isn't a name that nobody knows. He's a popular writer, so really impressive that this even got published at all. I know he had to change some stuff and take some stuff out to make the publishers happy, but still, for this to be published in the 80s, I think it's extremely impressive. I think it's worth the read if you're into some cannibalism. Not if you yourself are into, but if you want to read, you get what I'm saying. Next, let's talk about my favorite books. I'm very excited about this section. So, through all of these extreme horror books this year, I found a list of my absolute favorites that I really loved. This is not a list on which ones more favorite than the other, because it's just hard to compare, you know? They're all so different and they all provided me with something very different. So let's just kind of start at the beginning here. This is His Pain by Ralph James White. This book blew me away. I absolutely loved this book. It's about a young boy who all of his sensations he experiences as pain. There's something wrong with his brain, and so sight, hearing, sound, everything, sight, hearing, sound, you get what I mean, all his senses, everything is painful to him. He just perceives everything to the extreme. So if someone whispers, it sounds like something screaming in his ear. If he's touched, it feels like he's set on fire. So his parents do what they can with him up until he's a teen, and then they hire a man who says that he can solve his issue. What he ends up doing is kind of mixing pleasure and pain. That's kind of where the story takes off, you know? I'm sure you can imagine, but you can't imagine what actually happens, because whew, there's some messed up stuff in here. But I also thought that it was, okay, here's the thing. How do I say this without everyone just thinking I'm weird? That's okay, you can think I'm weird if you want to. But I really enjoy books that I feel like have something under the surface, or that I feel like I can take away from the story. And His Pain did that for me. It's a really messed up book. Yes, it's an extreme horror book. Yes, awful stuff happens. Yes. However, I did think that there was some beauty in it as well. There's one specific paragraph in there. I won't go too into detail because I've got a lot of books to get through. But there's one specific paragraph that I found. If you want to go back into the Extreme Horror Reading vlog, you can find it and watch what I talk about in there. But basically, I felt like it was just about how hard life is, and like no one asks for this, but we're all here and we fucking get through it. And I found something really kind of beautiful and motivating about the story, even though it's awful. And that's what I like about books. I like books that I can learn something from, or that I can take away from the story. And that book did that to me, and I absolutely loved that. The next one that was my favorite was Santa-Sploitation by Judith Sonnet. This one I just thought was hilarious. I cracked up the entire time reading it. It's about a group of women that abduct Santa Claus, like the actual Santa Claus. It's just vile and gross, and it's fucking hilarious. And I loved it. I thought it was so freaking fun. It's definitely less extreme. I think she even says in the back, like, yeah, I don't know if this is really an extreme horror novel, but, you know, it's messed up enough that whatever. And yeah, I agree with that. I don't know if it's necessarily like her book Clown Hunt. It's not that extreme, but it's still like vile enough that I feel like it fits into this category. And like, who comes up with that? Abducting Santa Claus? That is so funny. It was just hilarious. So I really enjoyed that one. The next one that was my favorite was Gone to See the Riverman by Christopher Triana. I really, really loved this book, and there's so much I really enjoyed about it. It's about a woman who meets a serial killer. She is writing him in jail, and she doesn't see anything wrong with that. And it's so funny because even in the very beginning of the story, she's like, oh yeah, he has groupies that try to meet up with him. I'm not like those girls. Like, I'm not in love with him. She just has no ability to see how fucked up she is. And I think that that's also kind of an interesting place to start a character, because usually as you go throughout a story, you like a character more, you get closer to them. But this one, you pull further and further apart from her because she's so unaware of her own actions. What an interesting story that this is told through because of that character alone. And it's so hard to write a story that's good, that keeps people engaged, that's interesting enough that you can have a character that everyone fucking hates and still enjoy the read. So I thought that there was some really genius stuff in here. The story is that this man, the serial killer in jail, tells her that she must go on this journey to meet this riverman and deliver something to him, right? So the whole story is just unique. It's interesting. The descriptions of her getting what she needs to deliver were so vivid. I could just see them playing out in my head. The descriptions of the riverman were amazing. There was just so much I loved about this book. And yeah, I mean, the extreme elements I feel like weren't as intense, but that doesn't matter to me. You know what I mean? Like, a book doesn't have to be the most extreme book ever to be entertaining to me. So I thought that this was fantastic. I thought that there was so much to kind of analyze and pick apart. And that's what I like doing with books. No matter how gross it is, if I'm able to do that with a book, I still come out enjoying it at the end. Another one. Oh my God, I love this book so much. This is Dead Inside by Chandler Morrison. This was one of my favorite books that I read all year. I absolutely loved this book, extreme horror book. I really enjoyed the writing style in this one. A lot of great one-liners in there. I highlighted throughout this entire book, if you couldn't tell. There were so many lines that I just loved. Like the very first line I opened to, cannibalism really isn't my thing, but there's nothing wrong with getting a little kinky now and then. There were lines in here that made me laugh. It's about a man who is into necrophilia. He meets a woman who's into eating some messed up things, okay? And the book is gross, it's disgusting. Yes, we've already covered that. These are extreme horror books. However, there's also something beautiful about this one. And again, you can call me messed up if you want to, but here's the thing, okay? I grew up reading horror books, watching horror movies. Horror has always been a huge part of my life. Always, since I was a little kid. And none of my friends really enjoyed it. Luckily, I did have some family members, my brother and my mom, that were into horror, but I mean, still not even, I would say, the way that I was, right? And so it was hard to like connect with people, and I didn't really ever have the same hobbies as people, and I just didn't really ever feel so like, oh my gosh, I'm so lame, but like maybe I didn't feel really like I fit in with the typical people. And so this book was really beautiful because under the surface, under all the blood and guts and gore and gross stuff and necrophilia and all that kind of stuff, there is a beautiful story about finding your place and finding your people. And to me, that is so fucking cool. And I feel like a lot of people that grew up reading horror felt that way. And I think that's truly why things like Book Talk and BookTube and Bookstagram have really taken off, because you get to find your community of people who love something so passionate the way that you do. And so I freaking love this book. I thought this book was fantastic. Again, do your own research before you read any of these. I'm not recommending these to you, I'm just saying these are what I liked. And the last one, of course, is Tender is the Flesh by Augustina Bastrika. This is one that's actually pretty controversial. People either seem to love it or hate it, which is pretty interesting, but I kind of get why. It's about this disease that infects all animals, so we're not able to eat livestock. So instead, they create humans to be eaten. It goes on the whole journey of the plantations that house humans and that, you know, make them edible for people. So it is disturbing in that way, but again, It's another one where I feel like you can dig under the surface and find your own meaning. And some people's meaning is like, oh, this is a comment on the meat industry, and so it wasn't a book for me. And I could get that. And although that is part of the story, you know, that it was not what I got from it. For me, it was more about government and life. There's some social commentary in there. I like when things are under the surface and they're not just plainly discussed, you know, like in the book Holly, for example, Stephen King's book. I mean, you're a writer, you can write about whatever you want. If you want to write about social issues or political commentary, that's your thing, you know? And he's very outspoken about his political beliefs. It's not surprising in any way. But I much prefer things like this, where it's under the surface, you dig through it, and you find your own meaning. It's not the author saying like, hey, this is bad or this is good. Do you get what I'm saying? So I really love this one. Yeah, one of my favorite books that I read this year. So those are the extreme horror books that I read in 2023. Feel free to leave me a comment down below and let me know what some of your favorites were. Let me know what makes an extreme horror book to you, because there's so much variety in here that I'm kind of curious what your definition of extreme horror is, because obviously it's subjective and is going to be different person to person. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon with another horror video. Bye guys!
I got nightmares in my head, I fear that the thoughts build up until I can't hear, that my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.